She had recovered her surface, the crimson robe again, the perfect posture, the voice of a woman who has decided overnight that the ground she lost was temporary. I noted this with interest. Resilience was, in its own way, a form of capability. "The pleasure is mine, mother-in-law," I said. "Who is our guest?" Lady Huifeng said, "Master Wen is a legal assessor, retained by the Liang clan." "How interesting," I said. "I was under the impression that the council had agreed to appoint an independent assessor, agreed at the formal assembly, in the record." "The clan retains the right to consult its own legal representatives as well," Lady Huifeng said smoothly. "Master Wen has reviewed the documents you presented to the council and has identified several irregularities in their provenance." I looked at Master Wen. He met my eyes with the particular expression of a professional who is competent, being paid adequately, and has decided that the ethics of the specific engagement are not his department. "What irregularities?" I said. He opened his document case. "The household authority deed presented at the assembly," he said in the measured tone of a man reading from prepared notes, "was issued 14 years ago and has not been renewed per the 3-year renewal requirement specified in the clan charter's 9th section. Under the charter, an unrenewed deed carries provisional rather than full authority and is subject to review by the household matriarch." The room waited. I looked at the household authority deed. I had read the clan charter, all of it, every section, twice. Section 9 of the clan charter specified a 3-year review, not renewal, of the household authority deed. The review was to be conducted by the household matriarch in consultation with the deed holder. Failure to conduct the review did not invalidate the deed. It created an obligation on the part of the reviewing party, the matriarch, to schedule one. Lady Liang Huifeng had not conducted a review in 14 years. Under Section 9, that failure was hers, not mine, and the consequence was a formal obligation to schedule one within 30 days, not authority to exercise the review unilaterally. I knew this because Elder Meng had mentioned it in passing 7 days ago when I had provided him with the anonymous summary of charter vulnerabilities he had been worried about. He had mentioned it as an example of a clause that was frequently misread. I had gone back to the charter that evening and read the section 4 times to be certain. "Master Wen," I said pleasantly, "which edition of the clan charter are you referencing?" He looked up from his notes. The current edition." "The current edition was revised 11 years ago. Section 9 was amended at that revision. The review requirement was altered from a renewal requirement to a consultation requirement, and the consequences of failure to comply were specified." I paused. "Were you provided with the revised edition or the original?" A silence. Master Wen looked at Lady Liang Huifeng. Lady Liang Huifeng looked at Master Wen. Something passed between them that was the mutual recognition of a problem that cannot be resolved by looking at each other. "I can provide a copy of the revised charter," I said helpfully, "if that would assist Master Wen's review. I have annotated several of the more frequently misread sections." The head housekeeper made a very small sound that might, in a different setting, have been a laugh. Lady Liang Huifeng said in a carefully controlled voice of a woman suppressing a great many things at once, "There are other matters." "Of course," I said. "I'm happy to address them, but I want to note for the record," I glanced at old Tan, who had followed me from the courtyard and was now positioned near the door with the serene invisibility of a man who has been taking notes in this household for 30 years, "that a legal assessor retained by the household matriarch, reviewing documents at her request, does not constitute the independent review agreed to by the full council. The council's appointment should proceed separately." "The council's appointment has not yet been finalized." "It has. Elder Meng confirmed it this morning. Master Assessor Huang from the Provincial Legal Office will begin his review on the 12th. I smiled. It is considerate of you to arrange a preliminary review, mother-in-law. Master Wen's findings will be available for Master Huang's reference. Lady Liang Huifeng looked at me across the room with the expression of a woman who has, over a long career, developed an extraordinary capacity to maintain composure, and who is finding, for the first time in memory, that that capacity has a limit. Liang Baoling, beside her, was looking at her hands. "Is there anything else?" I asked. There was not.
I had been in this body for 11 days when Liang Baoling came to my courtyard after dinner. She came alone, no maid, which was unusual for a woman of her station in a household where status was performed at every moment. She knocked at the courtyard gate herself instead of sending word ahead, which was either impulsive or deliberate, and with Liang Baoling I was beginning to suspect that very little was impulsive. She was 38 years old, 6 years younger than Kuifen, and she had her mother's face without her mother's hardness, the same strong bone structure, the same dark eyes, but the eyes were different in quality, less calculating and more watchful, the difference between a person who is looking for advantage and a person who is simply paying attention. Her husband was a low official in the provincial government and lived primarily at his posting, 3 days' travel away. She returned to the Liang compound for extended visits 2 or 3 times a year, which meant she was present now for reasons I had not yet determined. She had been the wild card expression at the assembly. She had said nothing across 11 days. She had watched everything. I poured tea. She sat. "You're not what I expected," she said. "What did you expect?" "Someone angrier," she said, "or more frightened. Even after the assembly, I thought, eventually she'll make a mistake. She'll push too hard. She'll give mother something to use." She looked up. "But you're not pushing. You're just being there, correctly." "Correctly," I repeated. "In the right place, with the right documents, saying the right things in the right order." She paused. "Where did you learn to do that?" I considered how to answer this. In my previous life, the answer would have been 12 years of medicine, 2 years of hospital administration, and 1 very long night of studying the charter. In this one, the answer I could give was, I had time to think. She accepted this with a small nod, as though it confirmed something. "My mother is not finished," she said. "I know. She has a plan that she hasn't deployed yet. I don't know the full shape of it, but she met twice this week with someone from outside the compound. I don't know who, I only saw the back of his robes, but they were provincial administration colors." She set the cup down. "I thought you should know." I looked at her. "Why?" "Because—" She stopped, recalibrated, started again, and I recognized the gesture. It was the same recalibrating movement her nephew had made 10 days ago, the gesture of someone trying to find the honest version of an answer rather than the strategic one. "Because what she is doing to you is wrong. What she has been doing for 20 years is wrong. And I have let it continue because it didn't touch me directly, and because opposing her has always cost more than staying quiet." She met my eyes. "I am tired of that calculation." "Baoling, what happened to your marriage?" She went very still. "You are here for an extended visit. Your husband is at his posting. You have been here for 6 weeks, which is longer than your usual pattern. You came to my courtyard alone, at night, which is not the action of someone who is simply passing on information." The stillness held for a moment longer. Then she said, very quietly, "He has taken a second wife." "Ah, your mother approved it," I said. It was not a question. "She arranged it." A pause, the specific pause of a woman swallowing something that has been sitting in her throat for weeks. "The girl is from the Liu family. Mother has been cultivating a connection with them for 2 years. The second wife was, I believe it was a transaction. My husband got the connection he wanted to the Liu family commercial networks, and my mother got something she wanted from the Liu patriarch." She looked at the table. "I have not yet determined what." "But you're trying to," I said. "I am trying to." She looked up. "I have some skills in this regard. I have spent 20 years watching my mother work, and I understand how she builds arrangements. A different pause, this one with something underneath it that is not bitterness exactly, but is adjacent to it, the particular flavor of talent that has been spent on the wrong applications. I looked at this woman, sharp, contained, quietly furious, arriving at my courtyard in the dark with information she did not have to bring, and I thought about the particular paths that women in this world were given, the paths they were given, and the ones they made themselves, and how rarely those two sets of paths intersected. Yes, I said, they would be useful, very useful. I picked up the teapot. Have more tea and tell me everything you know about the Liu family. She had more tea, she told me. It took 2 hours. By the end of it, the lamp was burning low, and the compound had settled into deep nighttime quiet, and I had 7 more pages of notes and a much clearer picture of what Lady Liang Huifeng was building and why she had not yet deployed it. The contact in provincial administration colors was, based on Baoling's description of the robes and the meeting times, almost certainly a clerk from the land registry office, which meant my mother-in-law was attempting to challenge the Donghua Street properties through the registry before Master Assessor Huang could review them, to file a competing claim, or more likely to alter the registration records in a way that made the property's history more difficult to trace. She had connections in the registry office. Of course she did. 40 years of managing this family's affairs meant 40 years of building exactly these kinds of connections, salted away for emergencies. This was an emergency. How quickly can she move through the registry? I asked. Baoling considered. The clerk she met with, if I'm right about which one, he's careful. He won't rush something visible. 2 weeks, maybe 3. Master Assessor Huang began his review in 8 days. 8 days is sufficient, I said. Baoling looked at me. For what? For me to file a precautionary preservation notice with the registry office, which freezes the records on any disputed property pending the outcome of the council's independent review. I paused. I should have done it immediately after the assembly. I didn't think she would move through that channel. I underestimated her speed. Everyone underestimates her speed, said Baoling. She relies on it. Not anymore, I said. I sent old Tan to wake the household's legal messenger before the night was done. The preservation notice was filed at the 7th hour of the following morning. By the 10th hour, it had been confirmed by the registry office and a formal acknowledgement sent to the Liang compound. By the 11th hour, I had received word through the household network, the particular information network of cooks and gatekeepers and visiting merchants that any competent household manager cultivates without appearing to. That clerk in provincial administration colors had arrived at the registry office at the 8th hour and been informed, regretfully, that the records in question were frozen pending a formal review and could not be altered or reviewed without the presence of the independent assessor. I was in the garden with Xiao Yan at the 11th hour, watching her practice the formal walking posture that clan daughters were expected to display at social events. Back straight, steps measured, the particular composed grace that announced breeding without announcing effort. It was, in my medical opinion, mildly absurd as an expenditure of a child's time, but it was the world she would move through, and I intended to give her every tool it required. She walked the length of the garden path 3 times, serious and focused, then turned to look at me. "Am I doing it correctly?" she asked. "Your shoulders are slightly forward, as though you're bracing for something." She straightened them, walked the path again. "Better," I said. "Do you know why the posture matters?" "Because it looks proper," she said, the slight edge in her voice indicating that this answer felt insufficient to her. "That's the surface reason. The deeper reason is that how you carry yourself tells everyone in the room what you think of yourself. If you walk as though you are waiting to be dismissed, people will treat you as someone who expects dismissal." I watched her walk the path a 4th time. If you walk as though you are exactly where you belong, people have to work against the evidence to treat you otherwise. She reached the end of the path and turned. "Is that what you do?" "Yes." Do you always feel it or just look it? I considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. In the beginning, mostly just look it, but the looking teaches the feeling eventually. The body learns what the mind is still practicing.
She walked the path again, and this time something was different. Not a visible change in the posture exactly, but a quality of intention, the difference between performing correctness and inhabiting it. I watched my daughter walk the length of the garden as though she owned it, and I felt something in my chest that was warm and fierce in equal measure. "Xiao Wei," I said. She turned. "I want to tell you something about the next few weeks." She came back to stand before me, attentive. "There will be a formal clan event, the mid-autumn banquet. The full clan will be present, and several of the clan's business partners and their families. It is traditionally hosted by the household matriarch." I paused. "This year, I am going to host it." Her eyes widened slightly. "Can you do that?" "The household authority deed gives me the right to host formal clan events," I said. "The matriarch traditionally does it because no one has previously exercised the right." I held her gaze. "Many things in this household happen a certain way because no one has previously chosen otherwise." She thought about this. "Grandmother will be very angry." "Yes." "What will you do?" "I will host the banquet, correctly, better than it has been hosted in years. And I will invite, among the guests, Master Assessor Huang, whose review will by then be nearly complete, and Elder Zhao, who has been trying to attend this event for 3 years and has always found himself uninvited through some administrative oversight, and several of the clan's trading partners whose relationships have been managed through your grandmother's personal connections rather than formal agreements." Xiao Wei was quiet, following the architecture of this. "And you," I said, "I want you formally presented at the banquet." She looked at me. "You are 11, I said. "You are the daughter of this household's first wife, and you have never been formally presented to the clan's social network because no one thought it was worth the effort." I kept my voice even. "I think it is worth the effort. I think you are worth every effort. And I want the people who have been treating you as an afterthought to meet you properly and understand what they have been overlooking." Something happened to my daughter's face that I do not have precise language for. It was not quite tears. She was too controlled for that, had learned too young to keep her feelings close, but it was adjacent to tears. The particular brightness of someone who has been seen, clearly and completely, and does not quite know what to do with the sensation. I should warn you that being formally presented means enduring a great deal of attention from people who will say polite things while thinking complicated thoughts, and you will be expected to respond correctly to all of it without letting them see that you know what they're doing. "She already knows how to do that," she said. "I know," I said. "I want you to know that you don't have to do it alone anymore." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, "Mother, who are you?" It was the question I had been waiting for, or one like it. In the 11 days since I had arrived in this body, she had watched everything too carefully not to notice that the woman who had opened her eyes in the aftermath of a slap was not entirely the woman who had closed them the night before. I looked at my daughter's face, Wanru's face, my face, this child who belonged to both of us now, and I thought about what answer was true and what answer was useful and what answers she could carry safely. "I am your mother," I said. "That part is real and it is the most important part. The rest is complicated, and I will explain it to you when you are older and I understand it better myself." I paused. "What I can tell you now is that I came here intending to take care of you. That has not changed and will not change. Everything else is secondary." She looked at me for a long moment with those eyes that missed nothing. Then she said, "All right," and she walked the garden path again, back straight, shoulders level, the steps of a girl who is practicing the posture of a woman who will not be easily overlooked.
The mid-autumn banquet was 17 days away. In those 17 days, I did the following things in no particular order of importance.
I met with Master Assessor Huang on the 12th day and provided him with the full documentation, ledgers, correspondence, property records, and the letters from my late husband to his mother, in a proceeding that lasted 4 hours, and at the end of which Master Assessor Huang looked at me across his desk with the expression of a professional who has just seen something that significantly exceeds his initial estimate of the scope of a case, and said carefully, "Lady Shen, this is a thorough record. I have had time to organize it," I said. "The correspondence in particular," he set the bundle of letters down, "these were in the household?" "In a study that had not been fully cleared since my late husband's death," I said. "And you came into possession of them recently?" "Yes," I said, "very recently." He looked at me steadily. "Lady Shen, the pattern documented here, the systematic isolation, the financial manipulation, the property diversion, this constitutes, under provincial law, a form of organized, deceptive conduct that carries significant legal consequences." He paused. "Are you prepared for the full implications of a formal complaint?" "I am not filing a formal complaint," I said, "at this time." He waited. "I am filing the documentation with your office as evidence in the property review," I said. "What you do with the broader record is a matter of your professional judgment. I would simply note that the parties most responsible for the conduct documented here are senior members of a prominent clan, and that the legal system's response to such parties has historically been variable." I paused. "I am choosing to resolve the household matters through the clan's own governance process first. The provincial legal system remains a secondary option." He understood this perfectly. A secondary option that becomes considerably more compelling if the clan process fails to produce adequate resolution. "Precisely," I said. He nodded slowly, the nod of a man who has just recalibrated his estimate of the person across from him, upward by a significant margin. "I also, in those 17 days, commissioned a set of new robes for Xiaoye, not the plain, too small garments she had been wearing, but proper silk, in the soft gold and white of a clan daughter's formal dress, with embroidery that I designed myself, and had the household's best seamstress execute, small persimmon blossoms along the hem and cuffs, the flower that grew in our courtyard, the flower she had eaten fish beneath on the evening when things began to change. She tried them on 3 days before the banquet, and stood in front of the bronze mirror in my chamber, and did not say anything for a long moment. Then she said, "Is this mine?" "Everything in this household that is mine is also yours," I said. "And yes, those are specifically yours." She looked at herself in the mirror, this solemn, sharp-eyed, quietly magnificent child, and something in her face shifted in a way that I thought she was not fully aware of, a loosening, the particular relaxation of a person who has been holding themselves tightly against the possibility that belonging is temporary and is beginning, slowly, to stop. I stood behind her, both of us reflected in the bronze, and I thought, this is what I was postponing in the other life. This specific moment, this specific wait, this terrifying, irreplaceable love that has no equivalent anywhere. I was not sorry I had arrived here. I was only sorry it had taken a death and a miracle to do it. On the morning of the banquet, Lady Liang Huifeng sent a formal note to the main hall, declaring that she would not be attending an event hosted by someone who had shown such disrespect to the family's traditions and elders. I sent back a note expressing regret at her absence and wishing her an enjoyable evening. Then I put on my white formal robes, pinned my hair with the household authority hairpin, a piece I had found in the deed box, jade and silver, that had not been worn in years, and I went to host a banquet.
The banquet hall of the Liang compound could hold 40 guests comfortably and 60 with creative arrangement. I had invited 53. They filled the room with the particular sound of a social gathering that is collectively uncertain of the evening's significance, and therefore slightly more attentive than usual, conversations fractionally quieter, eyes moving just a little more, the social antenna of 53 people tuned to a frequency that said, "Something is different tonight. Pay attention." I stood at the entrance and received guests. This was traditional. What was not traditional was that Xiao Ye stood beside me in her gold and white silk and was formally introduced to each arriving guest.
I watched the guests' faces as they encountered her. The initial surprise, she was not expected here, had never been formally present at events of this scale, and then the recalibration, the assessment of what her presence meant, and then the particular social arithmetic of people who are deciding how to position themselves relative to a child who is clearly being presented as significant. Elder Zhao arrived with 2 of his staff and was introduced to Xiao Yue with genuine warmth that she received with the composed grace she had been practicing all week. He shook his head slightly when he looked at me, the small gesture of a man acknowledging a well-played move, and moved into the hall. Master Assessor Huang arrived, as I had told him he would be welcome to, in a professional capacity, to observe a social proceeding that was relevant to the matters under his review. He arrived quietly, greeted Xiao Yue with formal correctness, and took an unobtrusive seat near the eastern wall, where he had a clear view of the room. The clan's senior trading partners arrived and were surprised, several of them visibly, to find that this year's banquet was being hosted by someone other than Lady Liang Huifeng. I watched them recalibrate. I watched them, in the calculations visible to anyone who knew how to read a room, begin the process of updating their assessment of where the household's authority actually resided. Zheng Hao arrived, in formal blue, and stood for a moment at the entrance before crossing to stand on my other side, not beside Elder Zhao or among the trading partners, or anywhere else he might have positioned himself for maximum strategic advantage. Beside me, on my left, with Xiao Yue on my right, the 3 of us at the entrance of a hall that had never, in Lady Liang Huifeng's long tenure, been managed by anyone else. He did not announce this either. He simply stood there. I did not comment on it either. I simply continued to receive guests, and he stood beside me, and that was enough. Liang Huifan arrived late, with her husband Chen Fei, who had the particular pallor of a man who has recently made a significant financial restitution and is not yet certain what the full consequences of his situation will be. He greeted me with excessive correctness. I received him with ordinary courtesy. Huifan behind him caught my eye and held it for a moment that was not quite gratitude and not quite alliance, but was something real, the acknowledgement between 2 women who have reached an arrangement that is not friendship but is something more useful than enmity. Liang Baoling arrived alone. She had spent the past week, quietly, without announcement, gathering the information I had asked her for about the Liu family and Lady Huifeng's arrangement with them. She placed a sealed envelope in my hand at the entrance with the practiced smoothness of someone who has decided to commit to a side and is committing fully. I put the envelope in the inner pocket of my robe and continued greeting guests. The banquet proceeded through its courses. Ah Zhu had outdone herself, the food was genuinely extraordinary, and I moved through the room with the particular attention of a host who is simultaneously running a social event and an intelligence operation, which in this context were not entirely separable. The moment I had been building toward came at the 5th course. Elder Zhao, from his place at the senior table, chose the moment himself, which told me he had been waiting for an opportunity rather than being content to observe. He raised his cup and said, in the carrying voice of a man accustomed to being heard across rooms,
I would like to propose a toast to our host this evening. Lady Shen Wanru has given us an excellent table and excellent company. To the household's continued prosperity. 53 people raised their cups. In the doorway, because she had come, after all, Lady Liang Huifeng, because she was not a woman who could stay away from a room where power was being exercised and not try to contest it. My mother-in-law stood and watched 53 people drink a toast to her daughter-in-law. The expression on her face was one I will not describe with satisfaction, because I did not feel satisfaction. I felt something more complicated, the particular weight of a victory that has cost everyone in the room something, including the winner, and that does not resolve the grief underneath it, only the immediate crisis. I met her eyes across the room. I did not smile. I did not perform triumph. I inclined my head, the gesture of one household authority acknowledging another, formal, correct, the acknowledgement of a woman who has won the field and is offering, without drama, the chance to exit it with some remaining dignity. She looked at me for a long moment, then she turned and left the doorway. At my side, Xiao Yue leaned slightly toward me, a small warm pressure, the weight of a child who has been watching everything and understands more than anyone has given her credit for, and said almost below hearing, "Mother." "Yes," I said, equally quiet. "I want to do what you do when I'm grown up."
I looked down at her, this persimmon blossom girl, this careful, courageous, dangerous child, and I said, "You're already doing it." She straightened, she picked up her cup, filled with warm osmanthus water, not the wine the adults were drinking, and she held it correctly, at the right height, with the right composure, and she looked out at the room full of people who were only now beginning to understand who she was. And I thought, whatever else happens, whatever the assessor finds, whatever Lady Liang Huifeng deploys next, whatever it costs to finish this, she will be all right. This child will be entirely all right. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything. The envelope Bao Ling had pressed into my hand at the banquet entrance contained 11 pages. I read them that night, after the guests had gone and the hall had been cleared, and Xiao Yu had fallen asleep still wearing the persimmon blossom robe because she had refused to take it off until the very last moment, and then fallen asleep between one breath and the next, exhausted by the sustained effort of being formally magnificent for 4 hours. I sat with Ah Zhu's leftover osmanthus tea gone cold, and I read all 11 pages twice, and then I sat for a long time looking at the lamp flame and understanding, finally, the full shape of what Lady Liang Huifeng had built. It was larger than I had thought, it was older than I had thought, and it was not, at its root, about me at all. Bao Ling had spent 2 weeks following a thread that began with the Liu family connection, the family whose daughter had been installed as her husband's second wife, and what she had found at the end of it was not a commercial arrangement I had expected. It was a betrothal contract. Not for Bao Ling's husband, not for anyone currently married, for Xiao Yu. Drawn up 3 years ago when my daughter was 8 years old, between Lady Liang Huifeng acting as household matriarch and Liu Guangren, the Liu family patriarch. The contract specified that Liang Xiaoyu, daughter of the Liang household, would be betrothed to Liu Guangren's youngest son upon her reaching the age of 14, 3 years from now, in exchange for a commercial partnership that would give the Liang clan preferential access to the Liu family's distribution network across 4 provinces. My 8-year-old daughter had been sold into a betrothal contract without my mother's knowledge or consent in exchange for a trade deal by a woman who had no legal authority to arrange betrothals for the children of the household's first wife.
No legal authority. This was not ambiguous. The clan charter's 6th section, which I had read 4 times by now, was entirely clear. Betrothal contracts for minor children of a living first wife required the first wife's signature and the approval of the full clan council. Neither had been obtained. The contract was, legally, void. But a void contract that no one challenges has a way of becoming real through the accumulated weight of assumption. And if I had remained the woman Lady Liang Kui-fong had spent 23 years constructing, isolated, diminished, too exhausted and too afraid to examine her own household's records, I would never have known about it until my daughter was 14 and being escorted to a marriage I had not chosen and could not stop. I put the pages down very carefully on the table. I breathed. In my previous life, I had stood in operating rooms with people's hearts in my hands, literally in 2 cases, during open procedures where the surgical field requires the surgeon to hold the cardiac muscle and feel it beat against their palm. I had learned in those moments that the most dangerous thing you can do is let the enormity of what you are holding translate into the tremor in your hands. The heart does not care how you feel about it. It only responds to what you do. I breathed. Then I picked up my brush and I began to write. I did not sleep that night. By the time the compound stirred with the first sounds of morning, the kitchen fires, the gatekeeper's bell, the particular domestic percussion of a large household waking up, I had produced a formal objection to the betrothal contract, citing the charter violations, with documentation of the relevant sections and a request for emergency council review. I had written a summary of the contract's existence and legal status for Master Assessor Huang, whose review was now entering its final week and who needed to know that the scope of the case had expanded. I had written a letter to my own natal family, Wanru's family, the Shen family of the northern city, with whom contact had been systematically reduced over 23 years, but not entirely severed, informing them that their daughter, Wanru, was well and that certain matters were in the process of being resolved, and that she would very much like to restore regular correspondence. And I had written a letter to Liu Guanren. This letter was the one I had spent the most time on, not because it was the most complicated, but because it required the most precise calibration of tone. Liu Guanren was not, based on Bao Ling's information, a cruel man. He was a commercial man, a patriarch who thought in terms of assets and arrangements and the long-term positioning of his family's interests. He had entered the betrothal contract because Lady Liang Huifeng had presented it as a legitimate arrangement from a legitimate authority, and he had not investigated further because investigating further was not in his habit when a deal appeared favorable. He had also, Bao Ling noted in her pages, been unaware that the second wife arrangement for Bao Ling's husband had been part of the same package. He had agreed to the betrothal contract and received several months later a suggestion from Lady Liang Huifeng that his daughter, a widow of 26 who needed a good placement, might find a comfortable situation with Liang Bao Ling's husband. He had agreed to this separately, as a courtesy to a business partner. He had not connected the 2 transactions. Lady Liang Huifeng had. She had received 2 benefits from one arrangement and presented them to each party as though they were independent courtesies. My letter to Liu Guanren informed him in the formal and courteous language of one household to another that the betrothal contract for Liang Xiaoyu was executed without the required household authority and was therefore legally void under the clan charter. It also informed him that the Liang household bore him no ill will and wished to discuss in due course and through proper channels whether the commercial partnership between the families might still be of mutual benefit on terms that did not require the disposition of a child. I sealed it with the household authority seal. Then I sent for Bao Ling. She arrived at the 6th hour looking like a woman who had also not slept, which told me she had been expecting this summons and had been awake waiting for it. I handed her the sealed letter to Liu Guanren and the pages she had given me, and I told her what I needed. She read the letter. She looked up. "You're giving him a way out," she said. "I am giving him a way forward," I said. "There is a difference. A way out implies he did something wrong that he needs to escape the consequences of. A way forward acknowledges that he was also deceived and offers him the opportunity to behave correctly from this point onward." I paused. Men like Liu Guanren respond better to the second framing. They are less defensive, more cooperative, and the cooperative relationship is more durable. She was quiet for a moment. "And Fei, my husband?" she said. "What about him?"
He received a benefit from this arrangement that he didn't know was connected. She set the papers down carefully. When Liu Guangren learns the full scope of how the arrangement was constructed, he will likely be angry, I said, at the person who constructed it. I met her eyes. Not at your husband, who received a placement for a widow in good faith, not at you, who had nothing to do with any of it. I paused. "Baoling, what do you want?" She looked at me. It was not a question she had been asked often. The unfamiliarity of it was visible. "I want—" She stopped. "Tried again. I would like to return to my husband's posting," she said, finally. "Not because I forgive him easily, but because the alternative is remaining here, in this compound, under my mother's—" A short silence. "I would like to return, and I would like the situation with the second wife resolved in a way that does not require me to pretend to be content with an arrangement I did not consent to." "That is a reasonable thing to want," I said. "And I think when Liu Guangren understands how the arrangement was brokered, he will be motivated to resolve it equitably. His daughter's placement was also managed without her knowledge as a transaction. He will not be pleased when he understands this." I paused. "Would you be willing to deliver the letter personally to Liu Guangren?" She looked at me steadily. "You want me in the room." "I want someone in the room who can read him accurately and respond in the moment," I said. "You have spent 20 years learning to read rooms under very difficult conditions. I would trust your assessment of Liu Guangren over almost anyone else's." Something shifted in her face. That quality again, the recognition of talent being used rather than contained. "Yes," she said. "I'll go." Master Assessor Huang delivered his preliminary findings on the 18th day. He came to the Liang compound in the formal capacity of his office, accompanied by 2 clerks and a messenger from the provincial magistrate's office, which told me before he said a word that the scope of his findings had exceeded what a property dispute typically warranted and had attracted the attention of a higher authority. I received him in the main sitting room with Old Tan present. Zhang Hao attended, at my invitation, sitting to my left with the focused quiet of a young man who was learning that the adult world is substantially more complicated than he had been allowed to understand. Master Assessor Huang's preliminary findings covered 14 pages. He summarized them in 40 minutes. The summary included confirmation that the Donghua Street properties had been unlawfully diverted from the household, confirmation that the pattern of ledger manipulation constituted organized financial deception, confirmation that the correspondence between Lady Liang Huifeng and my late husband documented a deliberate scheme to undermine the first wife's authority and isolate her from legal recourse, and in a section near the end that he delivered with the particular care of a man knowing something will be the most significant element, confirmation that the betrothal contract for Liang Xiaoye was executed in violation of the clan charter and provincial family law and was legally void and unenforceable. He also noted in his professional capacity that the evidence he had reviewed was sufficient to support a formal complaint to the provincial magistrate's office, should the household choose to file one, and that the magistrate's office had expressed independent interest in the matter, given certain implications for land registry practices in the province more broadly. I thanked him for the thoroughness of his work. I told him that the household would consider its options carefully.
After he left, Zhang Hao sat very still for a moment, looking at the document on the table between us. Xiao Ye's contract, he said. Yes. She was 8. Yes. She doesn't know. No, I said. I have not told her yet. I wanted the legal status confirmed before I explained something of this nature to a child. He looked at me. You're going to tell her yourself. Of course. How? It was a genuine question, not a challenge, the question of someone trying to understand how you deliver a blow to a child in a way that doesn't leave permanent damage. Honestly, I said, age appropriately, with the outcome included at the beginning so that the information doesn't sit unresolved. I paused. She will be upset. She is allowed to be upset. The correct response to learning that someone tried to sell your future without your knowledge is not composure. That can come later. First there is the feeling, and the feeling is valid, and I will let her have it.
He absorbed this. Then he said slowly, I did not know she was watching the documents. I know. She told me last week that she found the board with the loose floor. He looked at the table. She was protecting you, even then. She was 9 and she was already... He stopped. She has been managing this household's threats in the ways available to her since she was very young, with no support and no recognition. That is going to change. He was quiet for a moment. Then, what can I do? It was the question I had been waiting 17 days to hear from him, not the strategic version, not the version where he was calculating what action best served his position, but the version that was simply, what is needed and can I provide it? I told him. I told Xiao Yue that afternoon in our courtyard, with the persimmon tree dropping its last autumn leaves in small golden drifts around us. I told her exactly what I had found, in language calibrated to 11 years old, that 3 years ago, without my knowledge and without legal right, someone in this household had made a contract promising her in marriage to a family she had never met, that the contract was illegal, that it was void, that it could not be enforced and would not be enforced, that I had already taken formal steps to ensure this, and that the clan council and the provincial assessor both knew, and that there was nothing and no one who could make it real. And then I stopped talking and let her sit with it. She was quiet for a long time. The persimmon tree shed 2 more leaves. A sparrow landed on the courtyard wall and decided we were not interesting and left. Then my daughter said, with a precision that broke my heart and made me fiercely proud in equal measure, "Who?" I said, "Your grandmother, acting without authority, without my knowledge." Another silence, different quality. This one denser. The silence of a child who is processing the specific betrayal of someone who was supposed to be family. "She sold me," Xiao Yue said. The word was flat and clear and exact. "I attempted to," I said. "She did not succeed. She tried to sell me." She was looking at the courtyard wall, not at me. "For a trade deal." "Yes." She was very still. I did not try to smooth this over or redirect it or soften it further. I had told her I would not do those things, and I would not. The feeling was valid. I let her have it. After a while, she said, "I thought," and stopped. "What?" "I thought she didn't care about me. I thought I was just not important enough for her to think about." She paused. "But she was thinking about me." "Yes," I said, "in the wrong way, but yes." That's... She couldn't find the word for it, the particular horror of discovering that you were not invisible, but were seen as a commodity, that being noticed was worse than being overlooked. "I know," I said. She turned and looked at me with eyes that were dry and very dark and very old. "She won't be able to do it again?" "No," I said. "She cannot arrange any contract for you without my written consent and the full council's approval.
That is the law, and it is now documented in the assessor's record, and there are people watching to ensure it is observed. I held her gaze. Xiaoyue, I need you to hear this clearly. Your future is yours. Who you marry, when you marry, whether you marry, these are decisions that belong to you, and I will ensure they remain yours to make. Whatever you choose, I will support. Whatever you need, I will provide. You are not a bargaining piece. You are a person. She looked at me for a long moment. Then, very suddenly, she was crying, not the controlled, suppressed, not quite tears of someone who has learned to manage her feelings into invisibility, but actually crying, the unexpected, complete release of a child who has been holding something enormous for a long time and finally found somewhere safe to put it down. I pulled her close and let her. She cried until she was done, which took some time, and I did not say anything useful or useless during it. I simply held on, which is the only thing that is actually required. When she was done, she pulled back, her face a wreck, and said with the slightly affronted dignity of a person who has surprised themselves, "I don't usually do that." "I know," I said. "You can whenever you need to. That is what I am here for."
She wiped her face on her sleeve, looked at it, looked at me. "Azu made sesame cakes this morning," she said. "I saved you 2. "Did you?" "I thought you might need them. You didn't sleep." I looked at this child, this impossible, observant, indestructible child, and I felt the thing that had no name in any language press against the inside of my chest like a tide. "Go and get the sesame cakes," I said. She went. The full clan council convened 4 days later, on the 22nd day since I had opened my eyes in this body and looked up at a ringed hand and decided, all at once, to be different. It was not, this time, a contentious assembly. The assessor's findings had preceded it by 3 days, circulated to all 17 members, and the particular atmosphere in the Hall of 10,000 Ancestors was not the charged uncertainty of the first assembly, but the quieter weight of people who have read a document and understand what it means and have had 3 days to decide where they stand. They stood, in the main, where people stand when the documentation is unambiguous and the wind is clearly blowing, with the record. Lady Liang Hiufeng was present. She sat in the matriarch's seat as she had always sat, in formal crimson, with perfect posture, and she looked at the wall of ancestral names behind me as the council members one by one affirmed the assessor's findings, confirmed the void status of the betrothal contract, authorized the return of the Donghua Street properties to the household register, and, in a motion proposed by Elder Zhao and seconded by Elder Meng, formally noted in the clan record that the conduct documented in the assessor's report constituted a serious violation of the household authority and family law. They did not move to expel her. They did not move to strip her of her title. She was 71 years old and had spent 40 years managing this family, and the council was composed of people who had spent their lives in the same complex web of obligation and relationship that she had built. And there are things that institutions will do and things they will not, and formal punishment of a matriarch on this scale was, in this world, in this time, something the council was not prepared for. I had not asked them to be. What I had asked for was the record, and the record now was complete and unambiguous, and would remain so regardless of what anyone chose to say about it afterward. When the formal motions were done, Elder Bao asked whether the household wished to file a complaint with the provincial magistrate's office. I said that the household did not, at this time, intend to file a complaint. I heard the breath Lady Liang Hiufeng did not quite release, the fractional, controlled exhale of a woman who had been waiting to find out the shape of her consequence and has just learned it is smaller than she feared. I let that sit for a moment. Then I said, however, the household reserves the right to file and the assessor's documentation will be maintained in the provincial records in the event that any future conduct warrants it. The breath that had not quite been released was not released. She understood. This was not mercy. This was a leash maintained at a comfortable length that she would feel the rest of her life.
After the formal proceedings, as the council members dispersed into the smaller conversations that always followed these assemblies, Lady Liang Hiofeng rose from the matriarch's seat and walked toward the door. She passed me. She stopped. For a moment, we stood beside each other, not facing each other, both looking at the scroll of ancestral names on the western wall, 40 generations of Liang family history painted in brushwork that had faded to the color of old tea. "You will have difficulty," she said. Her voice was very quiet. "Managing this family alone, managing the trading relationships, managing a son who still has a great deal to learn, and a daughter who—" "I know," I said. "It is not a small thing what you are taking on." "No," I agreed. "It isn't." A silence. "I was not always—" She stopped. There was something under the words that I did not expect. Not regret, exactly, because I didn't think she was capable of a clean regret, but something
adjacent to it, the particular flatness of a person looking at the architecture of a long life and seeing, perhaps for the first time from outside it, what it has cost. "I know," I said again, and I meant it differently this time. She walked out. I stood for a moment looking at the ancestral scroll. Then I turned and found Zheng Hao waiting near the eastern pillar, watching the door his grandmother had walked through. "Is that it?" he said. "The formal part," I said. "Yes." "And the rest?" "The rest is the work," I said. "The properties need to be properly transferred. The trading relationships need to be rebuilt on documented agreements rather than personal arrangements. The legal charter needs the renewal review that hasn't been conducted in 14 years. The household accounts need a full audit." I paused. "And you need to prepare for the coming-of-age ceremony, which is in 4 months, and for which you will need to present the clan elders with a viable plan for your role in the household's commercial operations." He looked at me. "A plan?" "Yes, your own plan, not mine. I will advise. The decisions are yours to make, and yours to defend." I held his gaze. "You are almost an adult, Zheng Hao. This household will one day be in your hands. I want to give it to you in the best condition I can manage, and I want you to be prepared to receive it." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Why? Why not? You could manage it yourself. You clearly can." "Because it is not mine to manage forever," I said. "It is yours to grow into. My job is to create the conditions for that and then get out of your way." I paused. "And because I have other plans for my time, eventually." He looked at me with the expression of someone who is only slowly realizing how large the territory of the person before him actually is. "What plans?" he asked. "Xiao Yue needs tutors," I said. "Proper tutors. Mathematics, natural philosophy, history, rhetoric. She has a mind that has been given almost nothing to work with, and I intend to change that." I paused. "I also intend to restore correspondence with my natal family, which has been neglected for too long. And there are certain other matters." A brief pause. "I find that I am interested in the household's medical arrangements. The physician who attends this compound is 70 years old and has not updated his practice in 30 of them. I would like to bring in someone younger, someone trained in more current methods." Zheng Hao looked at me with the expression of someone who is only slowly realizing how large the territory of the person before him actually is. "You know about medicine?" "Some," I said carefully. "I have read extensively." He absorbed this. A small smile appeared. Brief, young, entirely unguarded. The first smile I had seen from him that was not calibrated for an audience. "The sesame cakes that Ah Yu made last week? Xiao Yue said you liked them. I asked Ah Yu to make more." I looked at him. "She made them this morning," he said. "They're in the kitchen. I thought, after the assembly, if you wanted—" "Yes, that sounds exactly right." We walked to the kitchen together. The days that followed were ordinary, which was the best thing they could have been.
Ordinary meant Xiao Yue at the study table with the first of her new tutors, a young woman named Scholar Fang who had studied at the provincial academy and had the particular combination of rigor and enthusiasm that good teachers carry, working through mathematical principles with the focused intensity of a student who has been starved for material and is making up for lost time at a remarkable pace. Ordinary meant Zhang Hao at his own studies in the morning and in my sitting room in the afternoons, presenting draft proposals for the household's commercial strategy and arguing for them and accepting challenge and revising, learning that the skill of being wrong gracefully is as important as the skill of being right. Ordinary meant the Donghua Street properties transferred to the household register, generating income that was properly accounted for and allocated, with a portion set aside specifically in Xiao Yue's name as the estate of a clan daughter who would one day choose her own direction. Ordinary meant a letter from my natal family, Wan Ru's sister specifically, a woman named Shen Wan Ling, who wrote in the bold and slightly impatient brushwork of someone who has been waiting 23 years to say what she had to say, arriving on the 28th day. It was 3 pages long. It contained a great deal of feeling compressed into very careful language, and one sentence, near the end, that I read 4 times. "We did not stop looking for you, Wanru. We were told you preferred distance. We did not believe it, but we did not know how to get through." They had been told. Of course they had. I wrote back that same afternoon, 6 pages, and I told the truth about all of it, and I invited Shen Ronling to visit whenever she could make the journey. Ordinary meant, in the evenings, in the courtyard, the persimmon tree bare now of leaves, but the lantern still lit, Xiao Yue and I at the weiqi board, and sometimes Zhang Hao pulling up a stool and watching with the skeptical interest of someone who does not yet play, but is beginning to understand that there is more happening on the board than the placement of stones. On one of these evenings, as the autumn had given way to the first hints of winter, and we had brought out the heavier robes, and Ju had made a ginger soup that heated the hands through the bowl, Xiao Yue won a game. Not because I let her. She had gotten faster and more patient simultaneously, which is the hardest combination to achieve in any strategic discipline, and she found an approach to the middle of the board that I had not anticipated and exploited it before I adjusted. She put down the last stone and looked at the board, then looked at me. "I won," she said. The tone was not quite belief. "I won," I confirmed. She looked at the board again, then at me. "Are you going to tell me you made an error?" "No," I said. "You outplayed me." The dangerous smile appeared, wider than I had seen it before, wide enough that it transformed her whole face, crinkled the corners of her eyes, made her look her age instead of a decade older. 11 years old and brilliant and exactly, precisely here. From his stool, Zhang Hao said, "She's been practicing in the mornings, before lessons." I looked at him. "I saw her," he said, slightly defensive. "I walk past the study on the way to the east courtyard." "How long?" I asked Xiao Yue. 2 weeks, she said, with the serene composure of someone who has been planning something and is delighted to have it land. "You've been practicing the board without an opponent for 2 weeks?" "She played both sides," she said. "I tried to beat myself." Zhang Hao made a sound that was, unmistakably, a laugh, brief and surprised and completely unguarded, the laugh of someone who forgot for a moment to manage the impression they were making. Xiao Yue turned to look at him with the expression of a younger sister discovering that her older brother has a laugh, as though this is a new and interesting piece of information. He stopped laughing and looked at the weiqi board with studied nonchalance. "You could learn," she said. "It's not that hard." "It looks hard," he said. "Mother taught me in 1 evening." "Mother," he said with the particular tone of a young man who has been discovering for 22 days how large this territory is and is still finding new rooms, is not a typical reference point. I poured ginger soup into 3 bowls and handed them around and said nothing, because some things are better left without commentary, and the warmth in my chest was already doing all the speaking required.
Bao Ling returned from her visit to Liu Guangren on the 35th day. She came to my courtyard looking different from the woman who had arrived at my gate on a dark night with an envelope and a 20-year accumulation of careful watchfulness. Not lighter, exactly. She was not a light woman, and I suspected she never would be, but differently balanced. the posture of someone who has had a conversation they had been needing to have for a long time and has discovered that they survived it. She sat down, I poured tea. She accepted it without the performative courtesy that she had used when this was still uncertain between us. Liu Guangren, she said, was angry. At whom? At my mother, primarily, at himself, secondarily, for not asking the questions he should have asked. She turned the cup in her hands. He had not realized the betrothal was connected to his daughter's placement. When he understood the full construction, a pause, he is a man who believes himself to be ethical within his context. Learning that he had been used as an instrument in something he would not have agreed to if he'd understood it, he did not take it well. What did he do? He agreed, without negotiation, to void the betrothal contract. He has already sent a formal notification to the clan council. She looked up. He also intends to settle a sum on his daughter, the second wife, that is sufficient for her to establish an independent household if she chooses. He said, a slight pause, he said she was placed without understanding the full arrangement either, and that he owes her better than he has given. I absorbed this. And your husband? Faye and I have spoken, at length. She did not elaborate on what length meant or what it had contained, and I did not ask. At length, she nodded, the second wife will remain in the household. Faye has made commitments regarding the future conduct of his household that I found adequate. She looked at the table. I do not know if adequate becomes better over time. I am willing to find out. That is your decision to make, I said, and only yours. She nodded. Then she said, in a different tone, quieter, more considered, my mother. Yes. She came to me last week. She did not apologize. She does not. That is not something she does. Bao Ling set the cup down. But she told me that she had not intended for me to be harmed by the arrangement with Liu Guangren's daughter, that she had considered it a good placement for a widow who needed security. A pause. I believe she believes this. I believe she managed to construct the entire architecture, the betrothal, the second wife, the commercial deal, and genuinely not see that each piece was using someone as a means to an end. She saw it, I said quietly. She is too intelligent not to have seen it. What she did was decide that the ends were sufficient justification. I paused. That is a different thing from not seeing. Bao Ling was quiet for a long moment. Yes, she said finally. What will you do with her? She looked at the courtyard wall where the bare persimmon branches made their winter pattern against the pale sky. I will write to her when I am at the posting. I will maintain the relationship in the way that is possible, which is to say, at a distance, in writing, with careful attention to what I choose to share. She paused. She is my mother. That is a fact that does not change regardless of what she has done. But I am done being managed by her. Those are both true at the same time. Yes, they are. We sat for a moment in the particular companionship of women who understand each other's terrain without requiring it to be explained. Then Bao Ling said, with the faintest edge of the sharpness that was her natural register, your daughter beat you at Wei Qi. I looked at her. How do you know about that? Your son told Old Tan. Old Tan told Aju. Aju told me this morning. She picked up her tea. He sounded extraordinarily pleased about it. I thought about this, my son telling the household steward that his 11-year-old sister had outplayed her mother at Wei Qi, and the pleasure in it, the pride of a brother who was learning, slowly, imperfectly, and genuinely, to be one. I thought about this, my son telling the household steward that his 11-year-old sister had outplayed her mother at Wei Qi, and the pleasure in it, the pride of a brother who was learning, slowly, imperfectly, and genuinely, to be one. She has been practicing both sides of the board, I said. I heard. Bao Ling looked at me steadily, and there was something in her look that was the closest she came to warmth, the regard of someone who respects what she sees and intends to say so without excessive decoration. She is going to be remarkable. She already is. On the 42nd day since I had opened my eyes in this body, I stood at the window of my chamber in the early morning, before the household had woken, and I thought about the woman who had been here before me. Shen Wanru, 41 years old, she had spent 23 years surviving in a household designed to wear her down, and she had survived it, not triumphantly, not visibly, but she had kept the records and she had kept her daughter close, and she had spent the last night of her life writing the documents that I had used to begin dismantling the structure that had crushed her. She had fought in the only way available to her until the very last moment. I did not understand what had happened between her death and my arrival. I did not know if there was a logic to it, or a mercy, or simply the random collision of two endings and two beginnings that the universe, for its own inscrutable reasons, had decided to overlap. I did not know if she could see any of this from wherever she had gone, or if going was simply going, and there was nothing after it. What I knew was that I was here, in her body, in her life, with her children and her household, and the architecture she had built in secret for the person she hoped might eventually need it. I thought she had built it for herself, for the self she hoped to become, if something changed. I thought perhaps I was the change she had been hoping for, and she had made herself into the conditions for it, and that this was the most extraordinary form of courage I had ever encountered in any life. I stood at the window and watched the winter dawn come up over the Liang compound, the roof tiles pink with the first light, the bare trees in the garden making their elegant winter shapes, smoke beginning to rise from the kitchen where a zoo was already at the fires, and I said quietly to a woman who was not there and might be everywhere, "Thank you. I will take care of them. I will take care of all of it. I will not waste what you left me." The light came fully up. The household woke. From the next courtyard, I heard Xiao Yue's voice asking the zoo something about breakfast, the particular precise timbre of a child who is making a request and is no longer bracing for the answer, no longer waiting to be told that her preferences are inconvenient, no longer small and careful with her own wanting, just asking, freely, the way children are supposed to ask. I turned from the window and began the day. There are things I will tell you from this distance about how it ended, or rather how it continued, because endings are rarer than stories suggest. Lady Liang Huifeng did not deploy another gambit. The leash I had described to Bao Ling held, not because it was unbreakable, but because she was 71 years old and the provincial record existed, and she was, at her foundation, a practical woman. She withdrew to her private courtyard and managed what influence she could through the channels that remained available to her, which were narrower now and clearly understood to be narrower. We were civil. We were never warm. Warmth was not possible, and I did not pretend it was, which I think she respected more than false warmth would have earned. She died 3 years later, in the spring, of an illness that came quickly and did not linger. I sat with her in the last days, because she was the grandmother of my children and the matriarch of this household, and because I could by then hold the full complexity of what she had been, capable and cruel and strategic and afraid. A woman who had been given no power except the power to manage other people's powerlessness, and had used it without mercy, and had built something that required a miracle and 22 sleepless days to dismantle, and had, in her way, loved the family she controlled, even as she controlled it. I sat with her. I held her hand in the last hours. She looked at me with eyes that had not softened exactly, but had lost some of their calculation, the way eyes do when the things they were calculating no longer matter. She said near the end, "The girl." "Xiao Yue," I said. "She has your stubbornness." "She has her own," I said. A silence. Then, "Good." A pause. "That's good." She died at the 3rd hour of the morning, between one breath and the next, in the particular way of people who have decided that the next breath is more trouble than it's worth. I mourned her, not simply, but genuinely. Chen Fei returned the 3rd Donghua Street property and the 6 years of back payments on schedule, which I had not entirely expected. His brother Fei Baran, the friend who had introduced Zhang Hao to Mei Jinghua,
left the city shortly after the assessor's findings became known and did not return, which resolved that thread without requiring further action. Chung Hao attended his coming-of-age ceremony 4 months after the council assembly, presented his commercial strategy to the elders, and was granted the title of household heir. He was imperfect at his work in the beginning and increasingly competent as the months went on, which is the correct progression.
He also, at some point during his 19th year, developed a friendship with a young man from the Wen family, unrelated to Lady Hui Feng's hired assessor, who was studying at the provincial academy, and who Zhang Hao brought to dinner one evening and introduced with the particular careful formality of someone presenting something they value and are not sure will be received well. I received the young man with ordinary courtesy and told my son privately afterward that his choices in friendship and eventually in everything else were his to make, and that my only requirements were honesty and kindness applied consistently, and that on both of those measures his friend had appeared, in one dinner, to be doing well. Zhang Hao looked at me with an expression that had no name in any language and said, "You knew." "I suspected," I said, "since about the 3rd week." "You didn't say anything." "It wasn't mine to say," I said. "It was yours, when you were ready." He looked at the table, then at me, then he said in the voice of someone handing over something they have been carrying alone for a long time, "I wasn't sure that it would be." "It is entirely well," I said. "It has always been entirely well." He put his face in his hands, briefly, in the way of young men who have not yet mastered the full vocabulary of feeling, and then he straightened and looked at the wall and said, "I think I'd like to bring him to dinner again next week." "Tell Ah Zhu in advance," I said. "She likes to plan." My sister-in-law Wan Ling visited for a month in the 2nd year, a small, fierce woman who had her sister's eyes and none of her caution, who arrived at the compound gate and looked around and said, "You look better than I expected," and then spent 30 days reorganizing my correspondence system, teaching Yao Yo to play a card game from the northern cities, and delivering her opinion on every aspect of how the household was run with the complete confidence of someone who has been waiting 23 years to say all of it. I liked her enormously. Yao Yo's tutors multiplied. By her 13th birthday, she had 3: Scholar Feng for mathematics and natural philosophy, a retired court historian for rhetoric and classical texts, and, after considerable searching, a physician's assistant named Master Qin, who had trained under one of the most progressive practitioners in the province and who agreed, after 2 hours of conversation during which Yao Yo asked him 47 increasingly technical questions, to add her to his tutorial roster, on the grounds that he had never encountered a student of this quality and would be wasting a professional opportunity if he declined. She was not sold into a betrothal. She would not be. Not at 14, not at 16, not at any age unless she chose it for herself with full understanding for her own reasons. She grew into the dangerous smile, the careful eyes, the posture of a woman who walks as though she is exactly where she belongs. She grew into her own considerable version of the thing I had been trying to model, not the same, better in the ways that people are always better than their models when they are given the conditions to grow. On her 15th birthday, I gave her a Wei Qi set of her own, carved jade stones, a board of rosewood in a lacquered case she could carry, and she received it with the composed delight of someone who knows the value of what she is being given. Then she set up the board and challenged me to a game and won in 40 moves, which was the fastest she had ever beaten me, and sat back with the dangerous smile at full brightness and said, "I've been working on the opening." "I noticed," I said. "You're going to be better than me someday. You already are, in several respects, and you will be in the rest of them within the year. I am trying to stay ahead long enough to keep the games interesting." She laughed. Open, full, the laugh of someone who has learned that joy is not a thing you conserve, but a thing you spend freely because there is always more of it available when you are not spending it alone. I won the next game, barely. She was already thinking about the one after that. I think about Shen Wanru sometimes, in the quiet moments. I think about what she wanted for herself and for the children she had.
what kind of life she had been trying to construct in secret, what she had been hoping for in the long nights when she sat with her records and her grief and kept going anyway. I think I know. I think she wanted exactly this, a household that was hers, a son who had found his way back, a daughter who walked like she belonged to herself, a table with enough chairs and food that was made with care, and evenings with lanterns in the courtyard and nobody at the door with something to take away. Small things, the things that are not small at all.
I am a woman made of two lives. One that ended in a Chengdu rainstorm, and one that began in a hall full of people who expected me to be nothing, and between them a 23-year accumulation of courage that built the floor I am standing on. I am standing very firmly. The persimmon tree in the courtyard has begun to bud again. It is spring now, the second spring, and the buds are small and green and entirely serious about becoming flowers. Xiao Yue is at her lessons. Zheng Hao is reviewing accounts. Zhu is making something that smells of ginger and brown sugar, and the particular domestic alchemy of a good cook who knows what a household needs. Old Tan has just brought me the morning correspondence. There's a letter from Bao Ling, who writes monthly now with the dry wit of someone who has discovered at 39 that she is funnier than she thought. There is a letter from the Provincial Academy regarding a lecture series that Scholar Fong thinks Xiao Yue should attend. There is a report from Master Assessor Huang's office, a routine matter, a property registration confirmation, entirely ordinary. And there is a letter from my Shen family, from Wan Ling, who is coming to visit again in the summer and has strong opinions about which route offers better scenery and would like my endorsement of the Eastern Road. I pick up my brush. I begin to write. Outside, a sparrow lands in the persimmon tree, considers the new buds with the concentrated attention of a creature conducting an important evaluation, and decides they are satisfactory. It stays.